let's move on to the Colts because you said you like them to win this division. I think I probably like them to win the division too. We'll talk about that at the end. But the Colts being led by the very unsexy and somewhat capable Matt Ryan, whose career was ended by the Patriots in that Super Bowl. And he's never really been back. And he is backed up by a guy who actually did deliver the death blow to the Patriots successfully, unlike Matty Ice, Nick Foles.
Fuck off.
Well, I mean, he did.
He had to get it in somehow, right?
He did.
You bastard. But you look at the Colts here. So when they had Phillip Rivers over 70 plays above average, they had, Andrew Luck, 137 plays above average. So Frank Reich does, when he's got the right quarterback, like to push the plays, get a lot of plays. So I have him going 61 plays above average. I think that's pretty fair. And that's why I have a decent amount of optimism for Matt Ryan, chucking it 615 times. I think he turns that into 4.677 yards, 30 touchdowns with only 12 interceptions. He's always protected the ball pretty well. I mean, that's like, to me, I was talking with a writer today who's going to write about Matt Ryan. It reminds me a lot of Kirk Cousins last year, where he was like the quarterback 16 to 17 in drafts, and you never really wanted him because it's unsexy. And he ended up having plenty of 19 and 20-point days and just being a very viable, like a high-end QB2 with a very nice floor. And if he ended up being your quarterback one, was it sexy? No, but your team didn't lose because you had Kirk Cousins as your quarterback, just like this year. I think Matt Ryan's never going to lose you weeks. Is he going to win you very many? Probably not, but he's going to give you that serviceable 18 to 20 more often than not. So if you're punting quarterback, he's probably my favorite. Like, I have him at quarterback 16 now because of how he projected out. I feel pretty good about Matt Ryan leading this team.
I don't, but again, they're playing just absolutely garbage teams.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Who knows? Maybe you have him projected as 16, and you have him at 16 on your big board. So I mean, I don't know. Maybe that is about where he belongs. It's just he does not excite me in any way at all.
Well, the one thing to consider with him too is this is going to be similar to Burrow this year. Like, this is going to be the best line Matt Ryan's ever played with. So that could help significantly. And he's got decent weapons. We'll talk about, I mean, I guess
How old is Matt Ryan? How old
we're
is he?
saving the best for last. I think he's 37.
Yeah. See, man, that's for anyone not named Tom Brady. That's really old.
I don't know how we're doing a Colts preview. We're not talking about the number one player in fantasy, but we'll get to him.
We'll get to him. All right, let's talk about Jonathan Taylor. And as far as Jonathan Taylor goes, I mean, this is, we actually talked about him, kind of peripherally talked about him yesterday, because I talked about how you like Dalvin Cook to have better numbers than him, but you don't have Dalvin Cook ranked above him. You gave a pretty decent explanation for that. Jonathan Taylor is pretty much the undisputed number one overall pick in most drafts, although, you've leaned towards Cooper Kupp a couple times.
Yeah, in PPR leagues I do, and have PPR. It's got to be Taylor, and it's very, very rare. Gurley repeated 2017 and 2018 as the number one running back, but it doesn't really happen. And last year at 21 fantasy points per game, that was the lowest RB1 we've seen in, I think, a decade. So, yeah, as good as Taylor was, and my God, as a player, like absolute steamroller, elusive, vision, it's all. I talked about Chubb being one of the best running backs in the NFL. Taylor is the best running back in the NFL, and he's young. He's great, and he's going to be great for many, many years. So 330 carries, 16, 315, a slight downtick in last year's stats, because I do think they lean a little bit more on the pass than they did last year when you have Matt Ryan. You don't have to ride him out to the ground. We've seen Reich just kind of mix in weird workloads every now and again, especially 2 years ago, where Himes was suddenly getting more carries in games, and it was a mess. I don't think we revert back to that, but they have talked a lot about Hines being very involved as a receiver. So I do see him, Jonathan Taylor, taking a little bit of hit in targets. Again, not much. I think he had about 50-something last year. 43 isn't a horrible amount, but it's not great when you have 74 going to Nyheim Hines. They've talked a ton about him as a big receiving weapon. So PPR-wise, there's a little viability to Nyheim Hines. But Taylor, I mean, horse. The only downside is maybe his receiving work gets a little eaten into. But, if this offense is even better with Matt Ryan, those 15 touchdowns could quickly become 20 touchdowns, and suddenly Jonathan Taylor is just that next level. I know I predict him down a little bit, but I can't pretend there's not a ceiling where Taylor actually takes another step forward because of a better quarterback play. It really could happen.
Well, I'd have to see the projections next to each other, but I mean, this is fresh in my mind. We just saw the Titans. I feel like his stat line you have him for is like identical to Derrick Henry's stat line.
Yeah, just
really just like almost exactly the same though. Like your total rushes, touchdowns, receiving work. It's almost the same stat line. So
just about. The big difference is Taylor's younger, fresher, just a better player at this stage of his career. So I have more faith in Taylor hitting this projection But I didn't project Derrick Henry there to not hit it. I think he does.
I mean, Derrick Henry's Derrick Henry though.
Oh, he's so fun. I'm so excited to have him back because I think we all just kind of forget how amazing he was those first 7 weeks because we missed him for those last 10.
No, it's all I've been thinking about for like 8 months.
Seriously, go to bed and I think about him and Scott Hansen, and that's about it.
That's about it. And all right, let's move on. Michael Pittman Jr. He's the only, in my opinion, viable guy that I'm even thinking about considering in this receiving core, even though I know you like Matt Ryan more than me. Is there anybody else, that I should be paying attention to? You an Alec Pierce guy?
I do like Alec Pierce. I'll talk about Pittman real quick first because I had him at like wide receiver 18 or 17 before doing the projections. And then it just came out and
I think you got him 11.
Targets is a lot. 1,203 yards is a lot. 8 touchdowns is pretty damn good too. And I've always liked the player. So when I project somebody, I'm like, that really pops off the page. And I'm like, well, I really like the player. And if that's going to be the volume he gets, I have no doubt he's going to do a lot of damage with it. I bumped him all the way up to my top 10 wide receivers, a third round guy that I am significantly targeting now. Big fan of Michael Pittman. There's nothing else to say really. He's not a Julio Jones. So it's hard to just be like Matt Ryan's wide receiver ones have routinely dominated, but Calvin Ridley had great years. Matt Ryan knows how to feed a big alpha, and I think Michael Pittman is a big alpha. I think he's going.
That's a good point. Even if I'm a little bit lukewarm on Ryan and stuff like that, he's been around and he does know what to do, and he is going to try to get it to his number one guy. That's a reasonable point. Just for the record, you haven't projected as wide receiver 11, and you also have him 11 on your big board. So
right in lockstep. So yeah, he's a third round receiver. I really like targeting.
But it's I look at these guys. Look at the guys around. You have him a spot above T. Higgins. To me, that makes my skin crawl a little bit.
To me, it's just the matter of the inconsistency you get with T. Higgins. Again, not overly that's ever ruining you, but give me a number one, a clear locked in number one with a good quarterback. There's obviously some number ones that I would not want above T. Higgins, not even close. But with Pittman having a solid enough quarterback, I'll take 140 targets from Matt Ryan over 100. They'll probably finish out. I guess this is the only way I'd summarize it is I bet you they finish out with very similar stats. Maybe even Higgins puts up better overall fantasy points. I just think Michael Pittman's will be much, much, much more dependable.
Would you take Pittman over Allen Robinson?
I know I have Allen Robinson projected higher. So, but
you don't have him ranked higher though. You have Pittman ranked higher. Would you take him over Gabe Davis?
I would over Gabe Davis. I would take him over Allen Robinson only because I know Robinson's also going to be coming back to me in round 4. If prices change and suddenly I'm not guaranteed to get.
Not Robinson if you're in a draft 4. With me, he's not.
Yeah, I know. But if prices do start to change and people finally wake the fuck up and realize that Allen Robinson's going to be an absolute monster in LA. Then I would probably flip those because I really do think Allen Robinson.
You would rather have Allen Robinson though, right?
I would. I just only take Pittman in 3 ahead of him because I know Allen Robinson's going to be waiting for me in round 4. You mentioned Alec Pierce. All the reports are he dominated red zone work in early camp. It's short season. I get that, but he's very explosive. I like the skill set he brings to the table, and it's a pretty wide open pie outside of Michael Pittman. We do know also that Frank Reich has loved peppering his tight ends in his career. He has also had pretty good tight ends to throw to, but even Jack Doyle was the beanstalk in the pants because Frank Reich loved to pepper him. So I have about 20% targets going to the tight ends. I love this Jelani Woods kid. I think he's the more athletic one, but Mo Alley Cox is also 6'7" and moves. So, I think either of those guys could end up viable. If Jelani Woods wasn't drafted, I would have probably had Mo Alley Cox in my top 12 tight ends, which is kind of nuts. But I think this might be a situation they cannibalize each other a little too much for either one of them to be dependable outside of best ball where you'll get those spike weeks in the lineup when they happen. So.
Gary W says Pittman over Robinson any day. Capital letters.
Wow.
What's up, boys? Good to see you live.
Gary's
What's up,
man.
Gary?
I love Gary. So, you got to take that one seriously.
Wonder what Gary's smoking tonight. Also, Gary says Colts
and we
can't
are
win.
sober for this.
Right, yeah. So
make sure
Colts can't win without throwing this year. They must make Pittman a league winner to go where the Colts want to go this year. I don't know if they can win globally, Gary. But they can win against the Texans and the Titans and the Jaguars.
Well, I'll zoom in on one reason they can win without throwing. Jonathan Taylor, the best running back in the NFL. They don't have to throw, and they probably won't throw if they have big leads against the Jags. And as you just mentioned, the Texans,
Right.
You don't have to throw against those teams. So yes and no. But Pittman will do. I think even on those games, Pittman will have racked up his damage by the time they're bleeding the clock. I
Right.
really think week in and week out, that's kind of my case for Higgins versus Pittman. Is I think it's just going to be a lot steadier. Like you're getting 12 to 20 every single time. With
Higgins
Pittman.
is so much sexier though. All right, come on. Higgins is sexy.
He's very sexy, but I think Pittman's sexier than you're giving him credit for.
Well, I don't think.
You want one last tidbit to make him a little bit sexier for you? Him and Matt Ryan are eating breakfast together, baby. I'm not kidding you.
Are they really?
They are eating breakfast together, Truth. And I know.
Well, that's good for like 650 yards.
That's good for exactly. That's good for 2K yards.
All right,
Michael Pittman.
That's the most convincing thing you've said yet.
What is up, you fantasy wolf? Thanks so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, share your thoughts in the comments. Check out some more videos and join the newest Wolfpack by subscribing below.